Hello everyone! Today I'm going to share my thoughts on Project Hail Mary. First the novel by Andy Weir, and then the film that came out earlier this year. I read the book just before or as the movie was coming out, and right after I was eager to talk about it, so I filmed a video and posted that on my Ko-fi page. I'm going to share some of that video here, condensed and with spoilers removed, though I am including snippets of some of my reactions, and those of you who have read the book or seen the movie will probably be able to ascertain what I'm referring to. Many times when I have read or attempted to read a popular, hyped-up book, I've been underwhelmed, and this has happened enough that I no longer pay attention to hot new releases and bestsellers because I just figure, it's probably not going to be for me. But once in a blue moon, there's something that I go for, that I've heard people rave about, and I'm usually late to the party, but I give it a shot, and I find it actually does live up to the hype. And for me, Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir is one of those rare instances. I have no choice but to give this book 5 out of 5 stars. And I say it that way because for the first few chapters, 30-something pages or so, I didn't even like it that much. And the main reason was that I wasn't keen on the narration. I found Dr. Ryland Grace's internal monologue kind of annoying and overly dorky in a way that just sounded unrealistic. But at some point, I started to find myself being pulled in. Maybe it was when things started happening, and it wasn't just Grace trying to figure out who he is, where he is, what's going on. Maybe it was the way he began to remember things, which gave us these flashback scenes with other characters. I don't know, but gradually I became more engrossed in the story. And then, what really got me hooked was the introduction of Rocky. I love Rocky. One of my favorite characters that I've met in the last several years. I absolutely adore him. And I love that the story shifted from being about a desperate bid to save humanity to still being about that, but also being about a friendship that develops between two species who happen to encounter each other in another solar system while on the same interstellar mission. And I actually loved all the problem solving, which is something Grace, with or without Rocky, spends a lot of his time doing. Now, Andy Weir also wrote The Martian. I saw the movie, I didn't read the book. Based on what I've heard about the book, it sounds like there's a lot of similarities. The protagonists are written in a very similar way. Apparently this is Andy Weir's MO, and it works. Now, it did take a few chapters for it to work for me, but we did get there. And at the outset, I was intimidated by all the technical language and jargon, because I tend to think that I'm stupid with some of that stuff. I'm not, but I don't have high self-esteem when it comes to science. The beauty of it is that Weir has a knack for explaining all these things in an accessible way. I could follow what was being discussed. More than that, I became invested in it, and I never felt like he dumbed it down that much. This didn't feel condescending or anything. I didn't feel like I was being talked to like I was an idiot. But what I really loved was pretty much everything from the time Grace became aware of Blip A in his proximity. Somehow, I didn't know anything about the story beyond the initial premise. I knew the main idea, that this guy wakes up, doesn't remember who he is, realizes slowly that he is the sole surviving member of a 3-person crew on a suicide mission in space, searching for a solution to send back to Earth and hopefully save humanity in time. That was all. So when he pulls up next to an extraterrestrial spaceship and they begin communicating, and he's out there and he waves to the little robot and it waves back, and then he makes contact with an alien, I was totally surprised, but very excited. And then we meet Rocky, who turns out to be the second most important character, as the story becomes as much about their getting to know each other as it is about finding a way to curb the astrophage that's taking energy from the sun and threatening Earth. I was fascinated by the section where Grace figures out how to translate Rocky's musical chord utterances into words and make a dictionary so that they can speak to each other, and the way Rocky is able to remember all these words, and Grace then begins to recognize the sounds that he hears as words, and what I was completely unprepared for was how attached I would become to Rocky, how invested I would get in their friendship, and how emotional the book would make me. I don't come to science fiction expecting to be moved, but this book made me cry 7 times. That must be a personal record for a science fiction work. There are not very many books that I've read that made me cry that many times. I burst into tears. I was so upset. Which is a moment I had been dreading, and I sobbed all the way through. I was like 3 pages ahead of him. I was like, what about Rocky? What about Rocky? 7th time. Oh my goodness, I'm getting teary-eyed just talking about it. And then Weir stuck the landing in the last chapter. I am quite pleased with the way the book ended. I was hoping there would be something like that, so when things went the way they did, and I basically got what I had wished for, I was more than satisfied. Back to me in the present. In that video, I also describe how I tried and failed to avoid ads for the movie, and I expressed some concerns I felt after seeing them. Even though the movie was getting very positive reviews, which is kind of unusual these days, I was apprehensive. I was glad that I chose to read the book first, and I decided to wait a good long while before seeing the movie. However, months later, people continue to refer to it with a lot of enthusiasm, which makes me feel like, oh, I want to see it too. And when it turned up free on Amazon Prime, I couldn't resist any longer. So we watched Project Hail Mary last weekend, and thank goodness. I really liked it. The stuff I was worried about, not a problem. It's an excellent adaptation. Not perfect, but about as close as you could possibly hope for. It looks great, it's funny, it's heartwarming, the main characters are spot on. Even though Dr. Ryland Grace in the book sounded like he was written to be played by Ryan Gosling, I still had my doubts. I have had different feelings about Ryan Gosling over the years. I've never been a big fan. There was a period in my teens when I couldn't stand him, but a lot of that had to do with how much I disliked The Notebook and people who were obsessed with The Notebook. And then later my position was, well, I don't like him, but I've got some of his music from Dead Man's Bones on my Halloween playlist. These days, I still don't really go for him, but I have come to appreciate his talent, and I like that he's a regular guy who doesn't take himself too seriously. There are a couple live performances he's done of that song from the Barbie movie, I'm Just Ken, which I've watched several times. They're just really good. I did see him in The Fall Guy earlier this year, and I think that's another reason why I felt... because I found that movie shockingly not funny. So I was worried that this would be more of the same style of humor. But in this movie, the jokes landed. Project Hail Mary was directed by Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who are famous for making comedies, not that that's a guarantee that your movie will be funny, and the screenplay was faithfully adapted by Drew Goddard, who also adapted The Martian. I think Gosling, who was also a producer, did a great job with that script. His performance actually ups the character's likability, and things I found kind of annoying in the book became endearing here. I came to like Grace sooner, and it was easy because he's so relatable. Gosling also gives us some of the clumsiest zero-G movement we've ever seen in a space movie, and I love his reaction when the ship asks if he'd like to take a spacewalk. Visually, the movie is stunning, with some of the most beautiful shots I have seen in modern sci-fi. Cinematographer Greg Fraser deserves a lot of credit for this. He's done some really big movies in the last decade or so. He's probably most famous for the first two Dune movies. I saw the first one. I don't care for it, it's not for me, but I will say the movie looked great. Here, I love how colorful and saturated it is. The green of Adrian, the pink of the astrophage. And I particularly love how the movie captures Grace's sense of awe and wonderment. The visuals, paired with the music, do a wonderful job conveying this and helping us feel it too. The scene where the crazy design of the alien ship is fully revealed and the epic music swells, I loved that. The effects are also very well done. They're convincing and real looking. I don't know the ratio of physical to digital effects. I know that they used both, but the result is a film that seems tangible, like everything's really there, and I find that refreshing. So many movies of the last few years have this mushy CGI, and it's just blech. Or just in general, they're bland, flat, washed out, lifeless looking. But not this one. It does move a lot faster than the book. We weren't 10 minutes in and I was thinking to myself, this movie is flying. Condensing things for time is standard adaptation stuff. I'm not surprised at all, and I'm not complaining. The pacing is probably better for it. It's just that with the book still pretty fresh on my mind, I was more aware. And there is a downside. You miss out on a lot of the process, the details, the stuff that makes you feel smart, provided you understand what you're reading. And I actually found the explanations, experiments, and scientific jargon easier to follow in the book. Maybe because I had to put in more effort to keep up, but also the way Weir writes invites the reader to make scientific discoveries with the protagonist, so I was more engaged in the problem solving. Here, we're told things, and I kind of just let myself be lazy and roll with it. And I strongly suspect that if I hadn't read the book, I would be foggy about what was happening in a few sequences. And I'd probably be saying right now that I struggled to follow exactly what was going on in some scenes. I wouldn't say the movie's rushed, though, and the good thing is it takes its time with the most important stuff. It doesn't shy away from sincerity, it doesn't undermine every emotional beat with a lame joke, and the fact that we hustle through the first part means we get to Rocky sooner. So I'm glad we didn't dilly-dally over the hors d'oeuvres at the expense of the main course. Based on the ads, I was worried about Rocky, but they did him right. He's expressive, full of character, just as adorable as in the book, a lighter shade than I pictured, and a little smaller, but excellently brought to life. His trills and noises are still there, not quite what I was hearing in my head. That sounds weird, but still present. I was afraid that they were gonna just get rid of that completely. And the switch to a computer voice, which I concede was probably necessary for this medium, is surprisingly smooth. In the ads, I thought he sounded robotic, but he really didn't. And the montage where they test voices was funny. Obviously, the Meryl Streep one, they say it's Meryl Streep, but they also included the narrator of the audiobook, the stunt coordinator, and Ryan Gosling's daughters. Found all this out after the fact. But ultimately, Rocky is voiced by James Ortiz, who was lead puppeteer. Rocky is mostly a practical effect. They used digital effects later on to remove wires and things. He was voicing the character on set so that Ryan Gosling wouldn't just be acting his scenes out by himself, but they developed such good chemistry and rapport that Lord and Miller, who had been planning to hire a big name to do the voice afterward, said, hey, let's just keep this guy's voice. And that was absolutely the right decision. I could tell, based on how much I saw people quoting him on the internet, that Rocky was a big hit with the audience, and it's no wonder. He's lovable. The introduction of Rocky Vision is interesting, and I'm glad they didn't overdo it. They just give us enough to understand what he's seeing and why communication is a challenge. And I really enjoyed the sequence where he shows up at the door and takes over the ship, and Grace is complaining about his bossy new roommate. That was fun. I will say this, the movie did not make me cry, and a few things that made me emotional in the book didn't have the same effect here. But without going into detail, there were moments later on that were moving, and if I had been watching alone, I probably would have let myself go. They did make some changes. They didn't include the part where Grace waves at the alien robot and then it waves back and then they're just waving at each other. And I missed that. Also, Rocky eating isn't nearly as graphic, but I think that's one of the things that they kind of toned down for the movie so that it would still be appropriate for a wider audience. This isn't a kids movie, but it is more on the family-friendly side. And they also skipped past Grace yanking out certain tubes. I don't mind that. That was gross in the book, but it was funny. So Sandra Hüller is well cast as Strat, who recruits Grace to study the astrophage. She is cool, businesslike, but not inhuman. They actually made her a little less rigid. I do feel like maybe the karaoke scene was a bit much, but she sure is talented. I've seen her do a movie in German and a movie in French, and she can sing. And they actually added that scene per Ryan Gosling's suggestion after he heard her singing on set. So, if the scene is out of place, it's his fault. The rest of the cast is fine, though they don't make as much of an impression. The weakest performances came from the students in Grace's classroom. Sorry, kids. And if you noticed that the Russian astronaut looked an awful lot like the AT&T lady, that's because it is. Going back to pacing, the only part of the movie I thought seemed a tad rushed was the final crisis. I was in anguish reading that whole section in the book, but here, it seemed to be dealt with much faster, and there was one element where I thought, they made that seem kinda easy. But it was still very effective, and the ending was great. I felt Weir stuck the landing in the book, and the movie is almost exactly what I had pictured. For me, Project Hail Mary delivered. I ended up loving the book, and despite my misgivings, I came away from the movie adaptation satisfied and relieved. In some ways, the book is better, but there are aspects where the movie has an advantage, and I don't think either one ruins or weakens the other. They are both really good. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will be back with another review next Saturday. Thanks for watching.